everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Write, Publish, Connect. My name is Alexa Nazaro, founder of the Axel Author Group. And on this program, if you will, we just like to talk to authors and industry figures about everything related to the indie author experience. Today, I have with us Genevieve Clovis. Hello, Genevieve.
Hi.
So, just to give you a little bit of background, Genevieve is a speculative fiction editor, author, and writing coach who works with emerging authors to ensure their novels are as monstrous and diabolical as intended. When not frolicking in the woods, Genevieve runs a variety of online writers groups and dabbles in the not so dark bookbinding arts. Very interesting bio. Welcome to our show, Genevieve.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining us today. Just very quickly, what kind of writers groups do you, especially the pluralized form, that kind of, because those can be pretty intense. So what kind of groups do you organize or facilitate?
I primarily run two different types of writers groups. So one is like prompt writing. You get a short sentence or phrase, and then you've got 20 minutes to do something with that. And we do a couple of those per evening. And then the other one is group coaching. So that's more for like if you're working on a novel and you're struggling to hit all of your writing goals and everything. So it kind of focuses more on keeping each other accountable and talking out any sort of writing hurdles that you're coming across.
Very, very cool. Have you been doing that for a while?
Yes, I've been doing that. I think 2014 is when I started the prompt writing group. And I actually, because I used to own a secondhand bookstore, I actually started them in my bookstore because I wanted a
Oh.
local writers group. And I was like, I have a store, and who wouldn't want to come and sit and be surrounded by books
Oh,
and just
that's
spend an evening writing?
Oh, that's so cool. As a writer myself, that sounds like a dream. That's incredible. And I'm so glad you mentioned the bookstore because indeed that's the angle we'll be talking about today. Aside from all your wonderful work as an editor, I just thought it would be really interesting to give indie authors the perspective of bookstores because that still remains an elusive facet of the indie author journey. So I thought it would be great to gain your perspective on that. Why don't you start by just giving us an overview of your bookstore?
Sure, yeah. So it was a secondhand bookstore. I ran it for 11 years. It was very much just a passion of mine. You know, a lot of people say one day I want to own a secondhand bookstore, and I was one of those people. And then, you kind of have it in your head. This is something you do when you're retired. And one day I was like, why do I have to be retired? And I actually just Googled secondhand bookstores for sale, and there were two.
Oh,
And so I
neat.
bought one of them.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And what were some of your priorities as the owner of this bookstore in terms of running it as a business?
Um, so I mean, I went into it knowing this is not going to be a lucrative business. I did this out of a place of love. I love reading and I love writing and I love building community. And I wanted this to be a place where people could come and talk about books and, talk about their ideas and just feel safe and comfortable and be able to buy cheap books. It was a secondhand bookstore, right? And I specifically wanted to ensure that reading was accessible to everyone.
And what kind of business systems did you have in place to sort of help run this bookstore? Because sometimes even the behind the scenes of an actual bookstore is something a lot of us as writers, as authors, we just don't know much about. And even though your bookstore might be a little different in that it was secondhand, did you have a particular management style? Did you?
I think, like, yes, every bookstore is going to be different, but there's going to be a lot of similarities. And one of those is brick and mortar bookstores are very community centric. So it's about knowing who lives in your area and knowing what those people are interested in. So obviously, when you start out, you kind of, well, this is what I like and what I want, but that's not necessarily gonna fit the community. So as like the longer I was there, the more it was like, oh, okay. And also recognizing when things change. When I first started the bookstore, romance was the biggest section. That was the section that sold the most and turned over the fastest. And then as the years went on, that stopped, right? And it was just like, oh, there's been a shift in this community from romance more to mystery, right? And so it's
Interesting.
kind of paying attention to those things and knowing what it is your community wants. And obviously, it still has to line up with what you're interested in doing. Um, but there is sort of this give and take that the community's not necessarily aware of.
Mm,
And then for mine, because it was secondhand, so it was primarily what people brought into me,
yeah.
right? And so being able to go through what people brought and spot, oh yes, this one will sell, and oh no, I don't want to take that one, and being able to sort through those things relatively quickly, and then display everything in a way that is digestible for people. I know a lot of people would walk into bookstores and they're overwhelmed. It's just there's so many books and I don't know where to start and my brain can't really handle all of the like visual noise. So having things laid out in a way that is easy for people to navigate, once they've oriented themselves.
In terms of the selection process, obviously this is not the same as receiving new releases, but what would be some reasons for rejecting books? Some of them would just be really old, or what were some of those criteria?
I mean, I had quite a lot of old books. I did have like a vintage book section. So, and I
Oh
had
wow,
books going back to the 1800s in there.
so cool.
Um, so not necessarily old, but condition mattered, right?
Yeah.
It has to, if it's falling apart, I'm obviously not going to take it. Um, and if it doesn't matter if it's a bit dinged up, but it depends on how that is. Like if there's food stains on it, I don't want that. But if it's just like, oh, it's a little bit bent, people aren't going to mind if it's a little bit bent. Also, do I already have that book? And how many copies of it do I have? Because sometimes it'd be like, oh, I've got like 5 copies of this one and it's not moving. So I'm not going to take any more. Um, and then other times it was like, oh, I have 5 copies of this book, but it flies off the shelf. So absolutely, I'm going to
You'll
take,
take, yeah.
right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning community and how community was such a focal point for your bookstore. Would you say that that's the same? Would you speculate that's the same case for independent bookstores selling new books?
Yes. I think outside of the big box stores,
Yeah, that's what I mean.
absolutely, the independent bookstores are very community centric.
What other common features would you say your bookstore shared with indie bookstores? So, not including the big chains like you were
Mhm.
mentioning before, but just independent. What would be some other common features?
Oh, in what
In
sense?
terms of approach, in terms of serving clients, in terms
Right.
of curating books, that kind of thing.
Right. So that sense of knowing what the people, with marketing, it's very much a give and take, as you are probably very, very well aware of, in that you can put something out, but you have to tailor it to the kind of people you want to get back in. And with a bookstore, because you're working on a slightly different scale than online, um, once people start coming in, you do have to acknowledge, oh, maybe this isn't the kind of person that I was envisioning at first, but can I accommodate this? Do I want to accommodate this? And how can I change to suit that type of person? What are they looking for? Can I provide it? And I think
Interest.
that's across the board with all bookstores.
So you were mentioning before how there was a strong presence of writers groups in your bookstore. So obviously
Mhm.
you did a lot of connecting with authors and writers. Did you have authors pitch their books to you?
Yes, I sure did. Um, like quite a bit. And it was a while before I was able to accommodate that. Um, I needed to get a better sense of how I was going to run my store before I could start taking that in. But I did eventually sell books for indie authors on consignment. So I had a whole consignment program set up. And it was a very interesting experience because, some people actually, most of the people who came in, it kind of felt like they didn't think it through
Okay.
outside of, I will go into this place and ask if they'll sell my book.
Okay, so that's a great segue
Mhm.
into my next
Yeah.
question about, well, the first thing I wanted to ask is, do you have like an anecdote of an author who really blew you away in a good way? And do you have an anecdote of an author where you said, I don't know, why are you here kind of thing? Just an example, not so much to stigmatize these individuals, of course, but just to give authors an idea of what a bookstore owner is thinking on the other
Mhm.
side of the counter when someone comes in.
Yeah. Um, in terms of one that I thought, "Ooh, this is a little much." Um, I had one person who came in and, they brought the book, but they also brought all this other stuff,
What
right?
stuff?
And so it was, like, not it wasn't a poster, it was like postcards. Like
Okay.
postcards, but they wanted them in particular places, right?
Oh,
So, like, having the extra bits, that's no big deal. I'm happy to stick a poster up in the window if I have the window space, or on my I actually had a community, like, bulletin board, so I'm
yeah.
happy to stick stuff up there, that's fine. But they were suggesting, "Well, put it right here." And I was like, "That's literally in front of where my business cards are." Why
Right.
would I put your thing in front of my, like, you haven't thought through how to ask nicely, can
Yeah.
you accommodate this?
So,
Right?
right. So it was being very presumptuous, kind of walking in and already
Mm,
having the plan of how everything that is rather interesting. That's
yeah,
quite audacious.
quite audacious. And just this, like, put my stuff in front of your own stuff, right? As if I am the more important one here. And it's
Yeah.
like, this is supposed to be a relationship. We're supposed to be on the same
Yeah.
team, right? So if you want me to sell your book, I have to be excited to sell your book, right?
Right.
You're asking me to champion it. It's more than just putting it on your shelf. And so sometimes, with that person, I said, sure, you can put your book on my shelf, but I'm not going to go out of my way to pitch it to
Mhm.
customers. So your book is on the shelf among all the thousands of other books, and it's got to stand on its own because
Oh.
you didn't get me in your corner,
So
right?
how would an author get you in their corridor to make you, an ambassador of sorts
Mhm.
for that author's book?
So for me, it was more about building up a um, a relationship of some sort, right? A lot of people would come in and say, "Oh, I love your store, and I'd love to, put this up." Except I'm like, I'm the only person who works here, and you have never been in my store before. So that's
Right.
great that you saw it online and you thought it was a lovely looking place, but you're coming in cold,
Yeah.
right? You've never been here, you've never supported my business, and now you want to ask me for a favor. But if you've come in a few times and we've spoken, and you've built up that sense of, oh, I know this person, and I come and I support your business, and I tell, even if you're not buying books, I tell people about your bookstore. I send my friends here, I'm helping you. Will you help me out a little bit? Right. And then that follow up can be however they're most comfortable doing that, whether it's like, I just want to put my book on your shelf and you don't have to champion it. And honestly, for me, that's usually when I'm like, well, now I'm intrigued. You feel
Mm.
like your book can stand on its own,
Oh.
and I want to see what it's about because maybe you're right. But then I'm going to champion it for you because it's like, oh, now I'm excited about your book. Um, and sometimes it was, can I have like a book launch here?
Mm.
Right. And so there's so many different approaches that people can take, but the more you've built up a relationship with me in advance,
Yeah.
the more likely I am to want to help you because I know you. You're not just some random person asking
Person.
me for a favor.
Right.
You're now this person who I know, and I get
Yeah.
excited when you come in because we're going to have an interesting conversation.
Conversation.
And of course, I'm going to help you.
That's really important. One of the stigmas that still remains in the indie author world is just badly published books. That
Mhm.
still exists, bad covers, did you see some of those from indie authors?
I have, yes, and it is definitely a factor, right? If you
Okay.
say, "I would like you to put my book on your shelf," first off, you should have brought a copy with you so that I can
Okay.
physically see what you're
Yeah.
asking me to put on my shelf.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't look like something that's gonna catch people's eye, then, like, I mean, I guess you can put it on my shelf, but it's not gonna go anywhere.
Right.
I had one person who it's not that the cover was quite nice. The problem was there was no blurb on the back. There was literally no information anywhere in the book telling you what the book was about. You just had to read it and hope for the best.
There was nothing on the back cover?
It was there was no there was something there, but it didn't tell you what the book was about. It
Okay.
was like author bio basically,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And so I
Okay.
thought, okay, that's great that there's an author bio here, but what is this book? Because
Right.
actually it had a title and it had a cover that were eye-catching. I saw
Mhm.
many people pick it up and then they
Oh.
couldn't figure out what the book was about and they put
Oh
it back
my
down.
gosh. Oh my gosh.
Right?
What are some other red flags that you would catch saying, this is not exactly up to snuff in terms of quality book design."
I would flip through the interior as well and if it's formatted in a way that's like, oh, what am I looking at here? Either your print is too small or
Yeah.
there's something strange with the formatting that, doesn't that runs contrary to what you would find in most books. And it's like, oh, how I don't understand this layout.
Mm.
Um, and I don't think it would be comfortable for people to read, right?
Read.
There is a reason books are formatted a certain way.
Yeah.
Um, or if it's like a really weird font,
Uh-huh.
and everybody is different about fonts. There's some that I think, oh, this is perfectly fine. And somebody else is like, if I have to look at this font another second, I'm going to die.
Yeah.
Right. So that is very much subjective. But, if you've written it in like Comic Sans or something,
Oh my
we're
gosh.
not,
Yeah.
we're not doing it.
No, no, no. Unless it's really, really appropriate, but I can't imagine
Yes.
reading a whole book in that font. So I
Yeah.
totally get it. Um, so it sounds like indie authors, when they're thinking about approaching bookstores, that they shouldn't exclude secondhand bookstores, that in
Yeah.
fact they might be quite welcoming. Would
Yeah.
you agree?
Absolutely. I would agree. I would say, if this isn't a place that you've frequented before, make sure, go in, suss it out a bit, but also check their website, check their social media, and see if that's something they're open to. Because some don't, but if they do, it probably says it somewhere on their website, right? And
Okay.
then you'll know, okay, am I going into a place that's open to this idea, or are they going to look at me like I'm crazy and tell me to go
Yeah.
away and stop wasting their time, right?
Right, right.
Um,
What are a couple of other tips you would give to authors in general, whether it's approaching a secondhand bookstore or an indie bookstore? What would be a couple of just tips that to you are no-brainers that authors should know about?
um, choose your moment wisely. I mean, you love books. You wrote a book, so you can take your time browsing. If the store is busy, don't demand somebody's time when they clearly have other things going on. You can come back later, or you can just browse until things calm down a little bit. Um, and if you've already started the conversation and then a bunch of people come in who are waiting to talk to the people who are working there, you can step aside. You can come back to your conversation afterwards. Um, because the worker is going to be looking around like, oh, there's people waiting and this conversation could take quite a while, right?
Right.
um so like it's okay, they're stuck there, so
Right. So that's all really cool. What would you say Walk us through a little bit the consignment agreement, which is something that,
Mhm.
when I talk to authors, I mention quite often. What was your consignment agreement like?
Yeah, so I did have like a formal contract. I wanted everything to be above board and that make sure that everybody's on the same page. Um, for me, there was two aspects. So one was a shelving fee,
Okay.
which sometimes I waived. It really kind of depended on the author and how much you've made me like you first.
So
um,
explain a little bit that shelving fee. What did that entail and what
yeah.
does that refer to?
So I only have so much space in my store,
Hmm.
right? And I had a small little section that was available for indie authors. So if you wanted a spot on that shelf, it was, I think, $25.
Okay.
And then, okay, you've got 25, you gave me $25. That gives you this spot on the shelf, right?
Okay.
I usually took 5 books at a time.
Okay.
And for the indie author section, I always tried to have one facing, right? So the front cover of the book is facing out so that it stands a better chance of catching people's eye. And I don't remember how long my contract was for. I
I
think
was
it
going to
was,
ask what kind of a window, like how long would you give an author to, okay, your book can stay on my shelf for 3 months or whatever the
yeah,
case might be. If you don't remember, that's fine, but that was
yeah.
actually going to be
It
one of my
was,
questions.
it was like, I think I checked in at 1 month, but I think that it was a 3 month contract, right?
Okay.
So, and I was very like lax about it,
Okay.
like I don't mind if you want your book to be here longer, your book can stay here longer, as long as I don't have other people who really want the
Yes.
space and, there's that kind of issue. Um, so there was the shelving fee side of it because I can't guarantee that your book is going to sell,
So,
but you are taking up space in my store.
yes. It's
So
like
I,
rent. It's like rent in a way, right?
yes, yeah. So a slight compensation there. And then if it did sell, um, there's the commission side of it, which I believe I took 30%.
Okay.
Um, and I was very upfront about that. So, and always said, like, this is how much I'm going to take. So mark your book up accordingly.
Right.
Right? Like you have to decide what you need to get out of it financially and then adjust based on what I'm telling you I need to get out of it
Okay.
financially, right?
Yes.
So that and I'm fairly easygoing with this sort of thing, so I was always open to we can have a conversation about this. It's not like 30% or nothing.
Hmm.
If you want to do a slightly different approach, we can do a slightly different approach. That's fine, as long as we've had that chance to talk it out first, right? Don't come in making assumptions that I'm going to change, but approach it as a would you be open to this, right?
And so when if an author wanted to propose a different ratio, a different commission, what kind of things would they mention to make their case, so to speak? Like, would you need a little bit of convincing? Would they point something out that would make you say, okay, I think that I'd be open to lowering my commission or whatever the case might be?
Um, Most people didn't ask me to lower
Okay.
or change the commission, but every once in a while somebody I feel like they just didn't like percentages, right? Like that didn't translate nicely in their head. So every once in a while, somebody would be like, well, if we sell it for $25, you can take five. And just kind of go at it that way,
Okay.
it's just like, you know what? That's fine. That's easy. I like when it's nice and simple like that as well. So and particularly that was one author who wrote sort of local history, local
Okay.
memoir, but like set in
In the
this
town.
community.
Right.
And they were actually quite popular. So I knew those ones were going to
So,
sell.
hmm.
And, this was also an author who like writes for the local community paper. And so at the end of all of their articles, there would be a pitch for the bookstore associated with their
Yes.
book being available there,
Right.
right? So there was a little bit more
Give.
marketing on their side that sent
Hmm.
people to me specifically for the book.
Let's talk very quickly about pricing, just in
Mhm.
terms of your experience for these indie authors coming with their new books. Did you notice a trend, like a comfortable sweet spot for, let's say, genre fiction, where that price you kind of felt, okay, this book, the price will facilitate sales? And were there times where you notice, oof, this, maybe one of the reasons this book isn't moving is just because it's overpriced?
Mhm. Um, 15, $16
Okay.
was a pretty good spot. But I will
Canadian.
say
Are we talking
Canadian,
Canadian? Okay.
15, $16 Canadian. But I will also specify that it was a secondhand bookstore,
Right.
right? The average price of the books in my
Yeah.
store was like $4.50.
Right.
So comparatively,
Yeah.
that was like, I could buy these like 4 books,
Right.
or I could buy this one book.
One.
And I had it set up in a way so it was very clear these are like local self-published authors. So a lot of people were perfectly happy to
Yeah.
support. They were excited to get to support somebody who lives in the community.
Community.
And they were happy to pay that price. But it did take a minute
Hmm.
where they'd be like, oh,
Yeah.
that's, and like sometimes they wouldn't notice, they'd get up to the
The
cash and
cash.
I'd tell them the final price of all their books and they'd go, "Wait, that seems a little bit much." And then I'd have to
Yeah.
say, "Well, this one's
That's a
by a
is a
local
brand
indie author and so
author.
they have to get paid for all of their efforts." And usually like once I said that, they'd be like, "Oh, oh, okay."
Yeah.
Very rarely did somebody put it back, but every once in a while they would because they came with a certain amount of money
Right.
to
Right.
spend and they'd say, "Oh, okay, well I can't do it this time, but I'll come back."
Okay.
Right?
Cool.
But yes, in the certainly 15 to 20 range
For genre fiction, you would
for
say.
genre fiction.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. What is one general piece of advice that you would want to share with authors considering the whole bookstore world? Because it can be intimidating for authors, especially because it's just, well, first of all, there's that whole leap when you do publish your book, and then bookstores can be intimidating and you just
Yeah.
don't know if you even have a shot. What would be some parting words as we wind down this conversation for indie authors and bookstores?
Um, so I worked alone in my bookstore, and it would have taken about 3 seconds worth of research for anybody to figure that out. So to come in and say, "Can I speak to the owner?" you
Okay.
know, but most bookstores have staff and you don't
Right.
know who you're going to talk to. And the staff are they not the people who can make the decision about can we put this particular book on our shelf? So do your research, look up the bookstore that you want to approach, figure out who it is you have to speak to. And if you can't find that information on their website, send them an email first, right? Feel them out that way because that's less of a demand on their time. And then they're prepped, right? And particularly if you say, I would like to talk to somebody and I'm hoping to come in on this day, or can you tell me a day that they would be available? And then they know at some point today, somebody's going to come in and ask me about this. And I already know sort of which way
Yeah.
I'm swaying and, go
It,
from there. It doesn't
yeah.
catch them off guard.
Right. Right. Cool. Genevieve, thank you so much for imparting all of this information. I know indie authors listening to this will find it so valuable. Thanks again for your time and have a good one. Thanks again.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. This was lovely.